Hey everyone, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest. Today I am here joined by Darren Olson. He is co-vice chair of the American Society of Civil Engineers Committee on America's Infrastructure, and he is also vice president and assistant water resources department head at Christopher B. Burke Engineering. Today we'll be going over the recently released scores for the drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater report card from the American Society of Civil Engineers. We'll talk about some areas of improvement and what steps industry professionals can take to be champions for change and improvement. Thank you so much, Darren, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start, first of all, with the overview of the ASCE Infrastructure Report Card for 2021, specifically for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. Where are the grades set, and kind of what's the overview that we're talking about here?
Okay, so I'll start with the big overview. So we analyzed 17 categories of infrastructure. And unfortunately, when we looked at all of those, the overall grade for America's infrastructure was a C minus. So that's certainly not a grade we would want to bring home in a report card, especially when you're looking at something as important as our infrastructure. But it was an improvement. We do this every 4 years. And 4 years ago, the grade for America's infrastructure was a D plus. So we have improved from a D plus to a C minus, but we still have 11 categories of infrastructure that are in the D range. So that is extremely low and is something we absolutely need to improve upon as a nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and specifically, two of the water sector ones are in that D range. It looks like drinking water did increase. It was a D plus before and is now a C minus from the previous report card. But stormwater's first year this year is a D, and wastewater is a D plus, I believe, and it stayed the same as it was the last time that it was on the card. So
That's correct.
um, for drinking water, we did, like I said, there was that grade increase. What are the things that kind of led to that increase? My understanding from reading the report is a lot of asset management stuff really helped out a lot, and then this drive toward the smart systems is really helping in aiding that effort toward asset management as well.
Yeah, so those two things, again, like asset management, doing things smarter. We don't have a whole lot more money than we did 4 years ago, but I think through things like asset management, we're able to spend that money more wisely and in more critical areas. So um, even from the Chicagoland area, they're doing things like detecting water leaks before they turn into water main breaks, using technology in ways like that. There is a drive towards resilience and trying to develop emergency plans in dealing with things like what Mother Nature has been throwing at us, and especially when you look at what happened down in Texas and Mississippi with their systems and how they weren't able to adapt to um, what Mother Nature threw at them a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So both of those things, some additional investments, I think on the federal side, all those combined together are what led to an increase in that drinking water grade. There was, when we looked at things, we look at, on a nationwide basis, there were 12,000 miles of water main that were being or planned to be replaced in 2020. So that's an increase. And when we start to see see investment like that, that would be a reason to raise the grade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my thinking too, we have the lead and copper rule revision, although the dates are kind of changing right now. That kind of
Yeah.
a thing would impact, I think, a lot of that drinking water score by forcing a lot of upgrades and replacement of old lines and stuff like that. So there may be some benefit to the grade in that regard as well, I would assume.
Yeah, and when I look at that, I look at that almost as a challenge for the next 4 years. When I look at the lead surface line issue, and emerging contaminants like PFAS, that's something that is starting to happen now, and that will be a challenge that we're going to have to address when we look at the report card again in 4 years. But here in the Midwest, when you look at older cities like Chicago, Detroit, Madison, Wisconsin has done a lot of work with their lead service lines, but these are older metropolitan areas that don't have millions of dollars of need for lead service line replacements. It's billions of dollars of need for lead
Hmm.
service line replacement. So that's going to be a real challenge for the drinking water category as we move forward these next few years.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit when you were saying the cities. I caught Chicago and Madison. What were the other cities that you mentioned there?
Detroit's another one that has lead service line issues. Actually, I think Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, has the most lead service lines in the nation.
Oh my.
So yeah, and it's hundreds of thousands of residences in the state, and even in the city of Chicago that still have lead service lines, and so that's going to be a real challenge over the next series of years as we figure out how to try to replace those in an economic way, because it's like I said, it's not $1 million problem we're looking at, it's billions of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure that we could talk about that specifically for a very long time, but I'll pivot us to wastewater so we can talk a little bit about the other scores too. So wastewater
Yeah.
remained the same from reading the report. It sounds like it's kind of in the position that drinking water was 4 years ago. That working toward those asset management plans will get that grade to move to that next step. Am I misunderstanding that, or does that seem to be kind of the same consensus you guys came to?
Yeah, that was a good summary. There's not quite as much asset management there as in the drinking water side. So we're looking to try to get wastewater up to that sort of technology. They're also going to have to deal with. I mean, they're dealing with things like these PFAS as well. So that'll be something that they have to move forward with technology. One of the things that both in all three of these categories actually are going to have to deal with is resilience, and how are they going to be able to handle not just what Mother Nature's throwing at us now or in 10 years from now, but 50 years from now. And when we look at where our wastewater treatment plants are, um, they are generally in lower areas because they're kind of at the end of the collection system. So they're at lower areas. They're going to be having to deal with more things like sanitary sewer overflows and combined sewer overflows solely because of what of the rainstorms that we're predicting to get an increase in size. And that doesn't even take into consideration the fact that the assets in the ground are getting older and older and are more prone to things like inflow and infiltration.
Mhm.
So there definitely are challenges on the wastewater side, and in order to try to get that grade, um, rather than kind of leveling out where it is now, we're seeing things like the sanitary or the combined sewer overflows, the remediation of those has slowed somewhat, but we think we need to kind of reverse this trend and get them into asset management and look at getting these systems more resilient to try to take the grade in the same direction that the drinking water is going. I mean, in
Yeah.
both grades, I mean, when we look at drinking water, I mean, it's a C minus. I mean, when you think about how important drinking water is to us, and the grade's a C minus, I mean, that's pretty scary. That's nothing to be proud of.
No, 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 not at all. One of the things I wanted to point out too was the capacity aspect of wastewater that was mentioned as well, that fit like 15% of treatment plants are meeting or exceeding their current capacity. So which
Yeah,
is an astounding figure when you really think about and break down how much that would actually be in the United States. That's pretty astounding. And that almost all the other ones are 80% or higher, or 81% of their capacity is what they're at. That's also a crazy number to think about. Like that, what guys, you guys have some really good figures for this to really highlight the issues that wastewater is dealing with. And when you're talking about inflow and infiltration, I imagine that capacity issue does become a major issue, because what do you do with the stormwater when you're already at capacity?
right, right. And when you think about the sheer magnitude of the number of wastewater treatment plants that we have, there's 60,000 wastewater treatment plants, and we're talking about, they're at 81% of their design capacity, and 15% of those have reached or exceeded a lot of wastewater treatment systems. And then you also combine into the fact that, you believe it or not, we're kind of in an urban sort of trend where people are moving into the cities and into the urban areas. So we're putting more and more pressure on these wastewater treatment systems because we've got more people that are relying on them and sending their waste to them. And that, also when we get, more urban areas, we have more impervious area, which means we have more runoff. So it all kind of ties together. But what it really comes down to is that um, these are very old systems that have a lot of pressure on them. And hopefully one of the outcomes of the report card is that people begin to realize what state they're in, and our wastewater treatment system, it's not in a very good state. If somebody said that your history grade was a D plus, you wouldn't be nominated to be the historian of your school. And so, these are very low grades that we need to work on.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanted to touch on the urbanization element that you talked about was something that was brought up with the stormwater report there, where there was the first year ever that stormwater is included here. It was a D, and the urbanization element was brought up specifically because that has resulted in a lot of impervious pavement surfaces being put out, and that changes the whole dynamic of water runoff. Um, so what are you guys seeing from the stormwater report? Again, this is the first time it's been there. What were you guys looking at when you decided to design the report on this, and what does it say about stormwater infrastructure and where we need to take it to move it up in a grade?
Yeah, so we originally had, for the last several report cards, back in 2017 and 2013, stormwater had been kind of lumped into wastewater.
Hmm.
But we began to hear from, when we would talk to our elected officials about this, the term urban flooding would come up a lot, and there was never a really good way to translate the wastewater grade into this. And so uh, there's also another organization called WEF that has done a lot of great research on stormwater needs. And so we collaborated with them and realized that we really need to break stormwater out because it's kind of the forgotten, third child of this water
Hmm.
infrastructure family. And our drinking water is largely out of sight, out of mind. Our wastewater is largely out of sight, out of mind. But you can hopefully tell people that the water that comes into their house and the water that leaves their house is part of this infrastructure system. But stormwater infrastructure was difficult to get people to understand its importance, and so we pulled it out and created its own separate grade, so we could start to look at things like urban flooding and the water quality in our rivers and in our lakes that is still degrading. And so that was really the purpose of breaking it out. And its grade was a D. And as we began to kind of peel back the layers of the onion a bit on the stormwater information, there's not a lot of information out there on stormwater.
Hmm.
WEF did a great study on on some of the needs, but there's no inventory of stormwater infrastructure like there is for drinking water and for wastewater. We know, nationwide, there's roughly 2.2 million miles of drinking water lines and 800,000 miles of wastewater lines. But there's really no great inventory of how many stormwater detention basins do we have, how much storm sewer do we have, what's the design capacity of these
Hmm.
systems. Our stormwater systems are just as old as a lot of our wastewater and drinking water systems, and those are 50, 100, 150 years old, and our stormwater systems are the same age. And what we see in these systems is that the age of these systems is causing um, their capacity to go down, and the the maintenance, the lack of maintenance of these is generally the capacity of the stormwater system is going down. But what's happening is that the storm events are actually going up in their intensity. And so we've got the situation where one line is going up, the need and the storms are going up, but the capacity is actually going down because these systems are aging in place. And as we back that out, 4 years, 10 years, 50 years, we see that there's going to be a serious investment need in our stormwater infrastructure to keep up with what Mother Nature's throwing at us.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. That even even if it wasn't aging out of its life, it would still be stagnant, right? So either way,
Yeah.
you're in a hole.
Right, because we know, I mean, in Illinois here, the past 3 Mays, we've set records every single May for the amount of precipitation. And so, and even this year, where they're looking at the NOAA's forecast for what we're expecting for spring precipitation, and we're going to be wet again this year. And so the trajectory clearly, at least in the Midwest here, and really throughout a lot of the nation, is that we're going to get more intense storm events, um, and our stormwater infrastructure is staying the way it is and just getting older.
Mhm. Yeah. So I wanted to cover some of the themes that kind of bled through with all of these grades too. And I think the number one theme, which surprise everyone, it's funding. Um, could you talk a little bit about
Surprise,
kind of
surprise.
the yeah, yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that funding element, and any other theming through lines that you saw with the grades here that kind of relate to everything, and how ASCE is trying to push those issues forward, and then how we as industry professionals can also be part of that voice, and also be part of championing that change.
Yeah, so you're right. Funding, and I look at it more as investment.
Yes.
Right now our infrastructure is, we've got, $1 trillion, trillions of dollars in gap, and we can either do one of two things. We can continue to go along like we are now, and it's costing, every family, it's costing them, $3,300 a year in because of our infrastructure is just poor. That essentially is what we're paying now, and things like extra travel costs and repairs to our cars, and dealing with water main breaks. So we can continue to do this, or we can make the investment, because we're either going to pay now or we're going to pay later.
Mhm.
We can make that investment, and do it in a smart way. And so, as far as the funding component of that, um, we would like to do things like, the drinking water state revolving fund is something that the state trickles down to the states, and the municipalities and agencies use that, to invest in our drinking water infrastructure. That's a successful program. We'd like to see the federal amount of that tripled. And then use things like the Water Infrastructure Innovation Act, WIFIA is what it's called. These are programs that are in place that if we increase funding to them, that's federal money that gets pushed down to the states, that then really goes right into the ability for us to invest in drinking water. And same with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. That's something that's used very successfully for wastewater projects, and even stormwater projects.
Mhm.
So these are programs that exist, they're in place, and if we can increase the funding in those, then we're going to increase the investment. Because as a design professional, I've applied for these, and I know that it's not like the money is just sitting there and they've got extra of this money at the state level. I mean, it's a very competitive process. There are
Mhm.
projects that are lined up to try to get this type of funding, and so if we can increase that, then we can increase the amount of projects that we're able to do.
Mhm.
Um, One of the other keys too, and which transcends all of these categories, I think, is resilience. And what we need to realize is that the way we're designing things now may not be the way that we need to design them for what Mother Nature is going to give us in 10, 25, or 50 years. And so through things like asset management, we're able to track the assets that we have, the age of them, and then start to look at things like which ones may be at the most risk, um, from say floods. And as we begin to then invest in this infrastructure, it's doing that in a way where we're able to to not have an issue we had in Texas and it's going on in Mississippi right now, where a weather phenomenon can lead to a drinking water crisis.
Mhm.
And so that's, I think, is something that would be really the second theme I see that goes through all of these is looking at making our infrastructure as resilient as possible.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Darren, for talking with us and talking us through some of the things that you guys were considering when you were going up through the grades and stuff like that. It's great that we were able to have you on and get some more insight there. And uh, if you are watching this and you want to know more about each of these scores, there's a lot of stuff on infrastructurereportcard.org. We'll include a link in the description to that so that you can check it out. And again, Darren, thank you so much for being on WWD Weekly Digest.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.